It's wonderful to see you all in real life after 2 years of online meetings due to the pandemic. In line with the general theme of this conference, in my talk I would like to take a look at late medieval art in situ, and especially and in particular the pros and cons. The amount of religious art, including paintings, sculptures, but also liturgical vessels and vestments, in the original setting is limited in the Netherlands. Much has been lost and disappeared as a result of the Reformation. However, works of art also have been preserved, mostly in museums, but occasionally also in churches and cloisters. This is what churches in most cases from the 15th and 16th century look like in the Netherlands today, largely empty. That is why the Old Church in Amsterdam is often used as a location for presentations of contemporary art. But if you take a closer look, up for example, there are still a lot of beautiful things to discover, such as this wooden fold. Until 1956, these folds were covered with paint layers. Immediately after the alteration, a black layer was applied, followed by a green-blue one century later, and a blue-gray layer in the 18th century. When they started to be removed, it turned out to be everyone surprised that remnants of late medieval painted scenes were hidden underneath. These paintings are dated from the year 1500. More late medieval fold paintings have been preserved, such as this one in Naarden. Oh, this is the detail from Amsterdam. Such as the one in Naarden in the Grote Kerk. I was there 3 weeks ago as a member of the advisory committee for its restoration, which will start next year. During the Corona period in 2020 and 2021, scaffolding was placed for the purpose of determining the conditioning and the preliminary investigation. Although seeing religious art in situ makes my heart beat faster, the opportunity to see folds up close makes me even more happier. But is this still looking at art in situ? After all, a situation has been created that is not as it was intended. But how interesting it is for a curator, an art historian, and also the general public to actually see the brushstrokes and the details of these fold paintings. On the other hand, it became also clear that nowadays it's not always clear what we're looking at. After the fold paintings were completed in 1518, several restorations were carried out. Many of these restorers, and also in the past decoration painters, added their signatures and made well-intended alterations that greatly affected the original. In addition to fold paintings, there are carved choir screens, stone funeral monuments, and sometimes painted and carved altarpieces in, for example, Haarlem, Delft, Den Bosch, and Breda. I just show a few examples. Closer to the borders of our neighboring countries, in for example Roermond and Maastricht, the churches are already more richly decorated. But when we really cross the border, we can see churches that really brings us closer to late medieval times. The situation in Germany and Belgium is so different from the Netherlands. Churches are often more richly decorated and equipped with painted and carved altarpieces and other liturgical objects. The St. Nicolai Kirk in Alker is, of course, a wonderful example. The St. Leonard Church in Zoutleeuw is also called the Reliquary of Brabant. It houses 21 masterpieces recognized by the Flemish government, including an 18-meter-high sacraments tower from 1552 by Cornelis Floris de Vriend. But in addition to these original masterpieces from late medieval times and the Renaissance, the church was recently decorated to give it more a medieval appearance. The columns and folds are accentuated with red and yellow, and stars were added to the folds. So here too, as with the fold paintings in Naarden, the adjustments that have been made over the centuries have affected the original context. And when we look at churches that still fulfill a liturgical function on a daily basis, establishing the correct dating of certain parts of a church is even more complicated. A couple of weeks I was on holiday to the Portuguese island of Madeira. The churches in the capital of Funchal are full of altarpieces and decorations. The altarpieces are still visited daily by many people and religious services are absolutely crowded. Although, of course, very impressive to see people burn a candle in front of an altarpiece by Michiel Coxie, it is, of course, a challenge for art historians when you have to take a good picture. I also had to deal with this challenge during my PhD research already a long time ago, and therefore I have to apologize for the bad quality of these pictures. In 2003, I went to the Canary Islands to see one of the only 2 altarpieces by the Antwerp painter Joost van Cleve that are still in situ. Although in this case it is partially still in situ, I entered the church, and you will probably all recognize it. I was a little bit in shock, because it was very dark. There were gigantic candles and vases with plastic flowers in front of the altarpiece, and I wanted to see it for so long already. To take a closer look, I have to climb the altar under the watchful eye of the priest. Although the painting still has a religious function, we don't look at the work today as it was intended by the artist. The Virgin and Child panel once formed the central panel of a triptych, but the work has been carried through the streets every year since the 16th century during a procession underneath the Canarian sun. The triptych turned out not to be very suitable for this event, so the wing panels were removed. And also the portraits of the donors who sat at the Virgin's feet were no longer meaningful and were sawn off. But the Virgin and Child were loved by the local community and they gave it a new frame. And you can see it with the wing things around it. On the advice of a local art historian, we pointed out the art historical importance of the Virgin and Child panel. Since 1993, a replica of the Virgin and Child has been carried through during the procession. This forms a starting point to another aspect I want to address during this lecture, the importance of replicas, facsimiles. These can be useful to create a glimpse of an original context, so that we as museum curators can provide the visitor with a better insight into the original meaning of a work of art. As you know, I work in Museum Katerijnenconvent, a museum for the history of Christianity. So apart from art historical value, the object in our collection often has another meaning, of an historical context, and also a liturgical interpretation is very important. Our museum was, among others, created precisely because the Netherlands switched to Protestantism, and many of the medieval objects lost their function. Objects of value were preserved and housed in museums. Nevertheless, most of them are fragments. Frames of paintings have almost always been replaced and at least have heavily overpainted. Medieval sculptures, especially in the 19th century, were more appreciated without the original polygamy. Most sculptures in our collection have therefore been professionally stripped of their paint layers. And when the objects are placed in a museum, they are placed behind glass and the original context is of course lost. On the other hand, objects are safe behind glass. The condition is monitored and visitors can see the works of art under the most ideal light conditions. It is definitely an advantage to see and keep works of art in a museum, but can we still judge and value objects correctly? How important is the original context for experiencing and interpreting religious art? Here you see the name-giving piece within the oeuvre of the Utrecht master of the female head of stone, an apprentice of Adriaan van Wezel. It was part of an entombment group placed in a church. It was richly polychromed and surrounded by other mourning figures around the tomb of the dead Christ. Although we can never put this fragment back in its original context, except perhaps by means of a digital reconstruction, some objects from our museum are sometimes still used for religious occasions. Part of our collection is indeed still on long-term loan from various dioceses. On special occasions, the objects are then requested back. On the one hand, it is interesting to see that these objects still have a religious function, but on the other hand, these situations are very complicated and can be a risk for the objects. Here we see Monsieur Jan Hendricks during his consecration in the summer of 2020 with the abbot staff from the Appian Egmont from the second quarter of the 14th century. And here Bernard Vallet during his episcopal consecration in 2021, last summer, with the 16th century bishop staff. Luckily, he was very aware of the valuable object and decided, in consultation with the museum and the Vatican, that he was not using the curl of the staff to knock on the door, as the ritual describes, but the bottom of the staff. This was a big relief for me and my colleagues. Within the old Catholic Church, medieval vestments are still sometimes worn. Although as a museum we now try to bring the most important pieces to our museum in order to guarantee the preservation of these unique pieces, as for example, this example from in Amersfoort, it's in Amersfoort, with the Tree of Jesse. Until 1937, the 15th century cope of the Utrecht bishop, David of Burgundy, was still worn by the former Old Catholic bishop. While I'm not a big fan of these medieval pieces to be still worn, I'm sure that it will be less fuss than when Kim Kardashian showed up in a Marilyn Monroe's Happy Birthday Mr. President dress earlier this month. In some cases, replicas or facsimile can be very useful. The medieval bishop staff can be scanned and printed with a D3 scanner. The quality of 3D scans and prints has increased enormously in the recent years, and especially when it comes to objects that are used during a religious ceremony. This is very useful. For the exhibition entitled Experience the Miracle of Gouda, museum objects has been placed back in the St. John's Church to recreate the 16th century situation. Museum Catharijnenconvent loaned several liturgical objects. That's better. Yeah. The originals are placed in the display in the church, but 3D scans have been placed on the altar, which enhance the effect of the sense of an original context. The desire to allow visitors to experience art and become part of the context is an aspect that has recently increased attention in the recent decades. From 2009 until 2019, masterpieces from the Royal Museum of Antwerp were placed back in the Antwerp Cathedral. It was a real eye-opener to many. And now in Gouda, the museum brings the past alive. Visitors are brought back to the situation around 1570, and we will all see it tomorrow, but I now want to make you a little bit more curious about it to show you some pictures. For Museum Catharijnenconvent, I now work with the Factum Foundation in Madrid. They make high-quality 3D scans and prints of art objects. One of the most impressive examples is, in my opinion, the painting by Paolo Veronese with the Wedding of Cana, now part of the Louvre, since Napoleon's troops stole the painting from the San Giorgio Monastery in Venice and took it to France in 1797. The Factum Foundation made 3D scan and print and placed the facsimile in its original place. Visitors to the monastery can now experience how this immense painting functioned in the space, and visitors to the Louvre can also enjoy the real painting, a win-win situation. But the application of 3D scans go further. In the context of a planned restoration of the crucifixion by the master of Lindau, in our museum we came to an important issue. Research showed that the blue in the background is a later addition. It may have had a 16th century addition. An original background in relief was completed gilded. The decision to remove the 16th century addition is not easy to take. After all, the blue layer is also part of history. Nevertheless, it is interesting to see how different the painting have looked like in the original state, and how it functioned with a complete golden background. 3D scans can be digitally restored, so an original carved pattern underneath the blue layer is reconstructed. As you can see here, it gives a good idea of how the artist once intended the painting. But now, back to the actual subject of this lecture, religious art in situ, we have just been awarded with a small grant by Micha, with which we can print a 3D scan of the crucifixion, one with the blue and one with the golden background. We want to place these two versions in a dark space, perhaps the church. Our museum is located next to a church, so that's easy, with candlelight in front of them. By the means of eye tracking, we hope to gain more insight in the way people look and to what extent the different backgrounds influence their viewing experience. To conclude, Modern techniques such as 3D scanning, virtual reality, and artificial intelligence can also contribute to the experience of art in situ. But in these cases, the original object will be replaced by a reconstruction. What does the average museum visitor and/or an art historian prefer? And can we really experience medieval religious art with our contemporary view? And can we really experience And I do not have the answers, but I think it's exciting to see what options nowadays are available to us. But to be honest, personally, first of all, I really enjoy art, the real art. And I want to be right on top of every piece. So, thank you so much for your attention.